Welcome to Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective podcast, where we meet experts from all walks of life to learn their intrinsic motivation so that they can share it with the world. What do we have in store today? Stay tuned to find out more. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody out there in podcast land. This is another episode of Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective. This is Hamza.
And I am David.
And really excited to interview our guest today. I've heard great things from Mama Joanne. Everybody knows we love Joanne, and a lot of people wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Joanne. And Joanne kind of put me in a headlock, like, you got to meet this person. You know, she has these mediumship capabilities. She has channeling capabilities. She's in the shamanic arts. She can walk and chew gum at the same time. And I'm like, screw all that other stuff. I'm talking about the walking and chew gum. I got to talk to this person. So let's talk to our spiritual master gum chewer among a multitude of other modalities, which we will cover, Kady Morgan. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so excited. And, you know, I'm most proud of my gum chewing capabilities, but I'm excited to talk about the rest.
Yeah.
We always talk about our hello moments. And, you know, when you started walking and chewing gum, we just knew you were destined for great things.
Yeah, that's when I knew my life was pretty solid.
Yeah.
So we do have some levity here, but just for the audience, if you could talk a little bit about yourself, what you're currently doing, and then we can dive in with our pointed homie-type questions, if you will.
Sure. Well, you know, I'm just really, really grateful and really honored to be on the podcast, firstly. And I'm really blessed and honored to be walking this path. And I am a shamanic healer. I work with different global healing techniques from around the world that I've kind of studied and gathered, and I love to combine archetypal energy and mythology into my work and to my healing to help people see their stories and really the bigger picture as to where trauma and where wounding originates. I'm a channel, and I have the ability to kind of walk between the worlds and bring through information from other beings and other time and other places in our multiverse. And yeah, I'm so humbled. This path kind of found me, and it called me. And ever since, my walk and my chewing gum has unfolded.
Now, there is we found over the past year and change that there are two types, if we can categorize, I guess, you know, probably a third dimension strategy or tactic, but there seems to be different groups in that everyone has these capabilities, correct? And
yeah,
you know,
definitely.
There's some definitely, right? But and some people access them, you know, during childhood, what have you, and then it goes away, and that, you know, that's where we were talking about the hello moment. And then others may have, you know, a pointed instance in their life where, you know, it was maybe turned upside down, or let's just say they were put on the path that they were supposed to be on. And were you the former or the latter? Did you always have this capability, or was it something in your life that led you down this path?
Kind of a little of both. I was born definitely with these abilities, as are most humans. I mean, like you were saying, I think we're all born with these gifts. I mean, it's our birthright as humans, as part of our DNA, but so many of us don't realize they're there to be accessed. And from a young age, I loved, especially the crystal beings. I loved collecting crystals and stones, and I always felt like I was talking to them, and I was always out playing with the fairies. And my mom used to tell stories about me talking to angels, which I don't really recall, but I think I was just too young to really remember at this point. And then I think, like a lot of people, when you're put into the cultural conditioning of our world, we just kind of shut down a little bit, and you go through school. And even though these were interests of mine, and I loved metaphysics, and I loved studying anything to do with the occult, and I just loved this world, I didn't understand that I could actually walk in it as a path. It just was never really modeled by anyone around me. And then there was a moment where, at the time, I was living out in Los Angeles, and I felt like I was a spinning compass. I felt like I had too many passions and too many directions, and I didn't know which way to start in order to kind of give myself purpose in my life. And I loved helping people, but I didn't know how to tap into that. And there was this kind of breaking moment where I looked up at kind of the universe, creator. It's just like, look, somebody give me a direction. If somebody is guiding me, somebody show me which direction I'm supposed to go in, because I could go in any direction right now, and it's overwhelming. And about 3 hours later, I got this knock on my back door from a neighbor that since became a really close friend of mine, but at the time I hadn't met. And she leaned against the door frame and said, "Hey, I'm Martha. Have you ever thought about shamanism? I just finished this amazing program." And it just kind of unfolded from there, and one synchronicity led to the next. It was pretty clear. It was like a knock on the door, literally.
Wow. Now, yeah, well, let me ask you, so you have a background, of course I did my Googles before talking to you, and so you, your pedigree, if you will, it is in theater studies, so are you from L.A., or did you go to L.A. to pursue the dream of being on the silver screen?
Well, I had so many different passions and so many interests, and I went to college for theater, and my then partner at the time and I moved out to LA because he also was an actor, and we thought, well, we'll just go and see if this is something, we'll give it a shot. And we both went to college. We met in college in Boston. But as soon as I moved to LA, I just felt like this is not my place. This isn't really my path. I love theater for the storytelling, and it's why I love mythology so much. I love understanding how stories can inform us and shape us, and how stories can help us heal. But at the time, I didn't really realize that was why I was so drawn to the theater arts. And pretty much as soon as we got to LA, it was just like, I don't want to do this. This doesn't feel right. It didn't feel like for me I ever wanted to pursue that for any type of fame or glory. It was always for the storytelling and for the craft of it. It's just such a cool art form. It's such a powerful art form for change and for growth.
Another thing that I noticed is if you're with someone that, you guys are going down this path initially, and then you may get exposed to something like you getting that knock on the door. Did you maintain the existing relationship, or did you guys both go, oh, wow, let's look at this, crystal beings, shamanic energy, and all this other modalities?
Yeah, I mean, I just pretty much went straight for it. It was almost like coming home. It was as soon as the path found me, it was almost like it felt like I didn't understand why I hadn't been doing it my entire life. And it actually almost felt like I had been doing it so many lifetimes that I was confused almost in my identity in this body. It's like, whoa, here I am again, another rotation around the sun, and I have a new body, and yet everything I'm learning about this world, about the stone beings and the earth and shamanic technique, just felt like I had done it forever. And so it was a little disorienting at first, and then it started to really anchor, and that's when it felt just deeply, deeply authentic.
I do want to stay there for 1 second because, there's once you start getting into, I guess, alternative, modalities like what we're talking about, there is one school of thought that we came to incarnate not to remember those past lives, otherwise you would be disoriented. Like, do I go to this person as my mom or this other person who's my mother in this life?
Yeah.
And it seems like when the veil thinned out for you, you were disoriented. So I don't want to kind of skip over what we romanticize by doing like past lives and what have you, because before we incarnated, maybe we weren't supposed to know that until a particular point, in this case, you going out to L.A.
Exactly, and I think that's a really important point, too, because I think that there's this kind of fantasy that the spiritual calling or the spiritual journey is like fluffy and rainbows and cookies, and it's just, there are moments of distress, and there are moments where you're disoriented, and I definitely felt disoriented when it came to starting to have this flooding of memory from other lifetimes kind of kicking in, and it's almost like taking on new memories that you don't remember making, and yet they're there fully formed. And so there's such a disassociation with the current body while trying to grapple with what those are. And, yeah, I mean, that kicks up a lot of trauma, of course, because, especially for me, and I'm sure for everyone who's experienced other lifetimes, we've all been, like, tortured and killed and stoned and drowned and, you name it on the path. And so there's this flooding in of all of these super intense sensory experiences that the physical body, and particularly for me, because I grew up with a lot of deep anxiety, as I think a lot of empathic people do, that it was almost like my nervous system was short-circuiting for a little while until I could find a way to kind of ground it and stabilize it again.
Now, I don't know about David, and I'll let him speak up for himself, but I personally came for the cookies. So, the rainbows and all that is great, but I came for the cookies for my spiritual path.
I mean, it's a pretty great path.
Yeah.
Once you get over the initial bumps, right?
Yeah.
So let's. I want to stay back at that point in LA when you got that knock on the door.
Yeah.
What? I mean, you were flooded with, wow, what direction do I go? So what was the ultimate direction that you took? What was your first steps?
Yeah.
So, my first steps were to get in touch with my teacher of many years, Esther, who has a number of different lineages that she carries. She's an incredible wisdom keeper. Now she's in her 80s and just has so much deep wisdom that she's amassed from like 50 years of walking this path. And her lineages are her own ancestral heritage, this deep spiritual Hebrew lineage. She also carries a lot of ancient Egyptian lineage, and she also works with Peruvian shamanic lineage, which is what I became an initiate of, and now is the lineage that I work with most and carry. So that was really the first step, was kind of hooking in with her, and she just happened, of course, to be starting a new kind of hoop or circle of learning as things happen when you're in right timing. So I just kind of slid on in there and just started learning and training with her, and worked with her for about 4 years, and then moved and continued to work with her from afar. I actually still work with her and still learn from her.
Now, you said she started a circle, so I'm probably being more semantic than I should be, but was this a Wiccan circle?
No, actually, it's specifically shamanic lineage. It's from Peru, and it's deep indigenous medicine of the Caro lineage of the Altiplano region of Peru. And though I think every culture on the planet, whether it's shamanic or otherwise, has a magical connection and a magical background, it wasn't specifically aligned to any particular magical practice other than the wisdom teachings of this lineage. But the beauty of this lineage is that it actually wants to be shared with the world. You know, these incredible beings, they're descended from the Inca. And when the Spanish came in and started conquesting around all of South America, they had the foresight and the prophecy to go up into the high mountains, into the high Altiplano, and actually just hide, or rather maybe not even hide, but retain their wisdom for 500 years. And then the prophecy said they needed to share it, and that the eagle and the condor, the North and the South Americas, needed to start to talk again. So they actively brought this wisdom down off the mountains and started to teach it widely so that humanity could start to pulse with this new rhythm of the heart and some of these ancient teachings that, gosh, we so need right now. We so need to combine the ancient and the new.
Did you make a pilgrimage down to Peru or spend any amount of time there?
Actually, funnily enough, I'm making a pilgrimage there in October. And though I've studied this lineage for a number of years, almost 8 years, every time I've wanted to go down to the actual land, the experience hasn't opened yet. And so for the first time, the gateway has opened. And so I'm actually officially going in October.
Wow. What are you going to be doing when you get down there?
I am going to be touring a lot of sacred sites with a Paco who actually carries a lot of this indigenous medicine and works with the Karo tribe specifically. And he and a group of some medicine workers are going to be doing sacred ceremony and pilgrimage to reconnect the sekes, or the energy centers of our physical body, to the land there, and to actually be able to kind of weave those golden threads together.
Well, does any of those ceremonies include doing any kind of ayahuasca stuff?
Actually, I do think that there may be opportunity to experience San Pedro medicine. The ayahuasca medicine is not a part of the trip, though. But I do believe really strongly and wholeheartedly that our plant teachers are here to help us on this planet, and that we used to hear their wisdom so much more than we do now. I think it's incredibly powerful, incredibly vital that we work with plant teachers to know ourselves.
There might be some synchronicity on our part, because I know David and I were looking at some retreats late last year also.
Yeah. You know, I think pilgrimage is one of the most important things we can do for ourselves and for our soul.
Yeah.
Now, have you dealt with, before I ask this question, because there's, there is one school of thought of, let's dive in to, these plant medicines, right? And obviously when you go to places like Peru, they're in the cities, there are people that will take care or take advantage of you with the charlatans. But when you go out with the elders, you have that experience that you're looking for. And so there's a wide range of people sharing their experiences, especially in 2018 with social media, people losing it and what have you.
It's become quite a fad,
It is. It's like, bucket list. Like, okay, I'm going to chew gum, I'm going to have cookies, and then I'm going to do plant medicine. But there's a school of thought that it may be a crutch, in that, especially that's why I want to get your opinion, because you have the capacity for mediumship and channeling, and you've been in the shamanic arts for years, that I'm just wondering, and it may be just a future podcast if you haven't done it yet, of your experience of partaking in a plant medicine versus relying on the capabilities that you have gone beyond the surface. Yeah,
well, I think I have had the opportunity to experience ayahuasca, actually. And I do think that plant medicine is really important and really vital for the human connection. I do also agree that it's not necessary, and it's not for everybody. That journey is so unique, and the plant medicine doesn't open the capacity for you to connect a channel. I mean, that's already there. Every human has that. The plant medicine acts as a conduit to assist you in deepening into yourself, to not necessarily have to learn about the other worlds and to get out of the body, but rather to let the medicine actually help you deepen your understanding of who you are, to peel back the layers, to kind of move out of the old paradigm of our cultural conditioning, our behaviors, our family patterns, our ancestry. At least for me, that's what it felt, particularly vital to do. And yet, I also am in deep, deep, deep humility to our plant teachers and deep reverence to our plant teachers, because they're not recreational. And I think that's part of what I think can be a little bit frustrating about witnessing the ways in which this has become a trend right now, because there is this sense and this notion of like, oh, well, this is just another trippy experience. This is another kind of party experience, and actually it's the furthest thing from it, particularly with my understanding of ayahuasca, which is very, very limited from my own just, the 2 times that I've experienced her. But, she found me. Again, I felt this deep call to work with her for about 10 years. And because I do have the ability to kind of connect into energies outside of myself, I work a lot with plant spirit and plant spirit medicine. And I have plants that talk to me and they visit me in dreams, and ayahuasca would visit me in dreams. And it would almost be like going to school. And in my dreams, I'd just get these really intense kind of holographic downloads that would be kind of pinged at me that I wouldn't even be able to unpack or understand. And then I'd wake up just with different perspective on my life. But every time I felt this kind of call to work with her, I heard very strongly, not yet. First get to know me mentally, understand the physiology, understand the heart and the spirit before you allow yourself to imbibe the physical medicine, because I feel like that's kind of the zenith of the experience. But, for me, it was 10 years of just kind of humbly learning from her outside of the actual physical expression. And then just had this beautiful serendipitous experience where 2 Colombian Taita, which is another word for shaman, famous Paco, ended up coming and brought this medicine, and it was deeply transformative, life-changing. But reverence is the key when it comes to our plant teachers. And again, I mean, they're certainly not necessary for our evolution, but they can be quite powerful catalysts to help us with our evolution.
You had said, I'm sorry, I didn't want to take over. I know David's chopping at the bit here. Go ahead, David.
No. Well, I was kind of probably maybe jumping ahead a little bit, but I was interested in asking about how, once you kind of started on this path, how did you get introduced to channeling? How did that come?
Wait, can we put a pin in that one?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Go ahead.
All right, yeah. I mean, we'll get to it, and I know that the hour...
We could talk about a million things. I know.
I know, because we're so at the beginning. But I want to not digress a little. Well, I do want to digress a little bit, right? Because I guess you can kind of get that with me. It sounds like, dating, where on the first date you don't ask the person to marry you. You have to get to know the person and so on and so forth, right?
Yeah, it's a relationship, right? You're building a relationship. Yeah, you're building a relationship. A companionship with the plants. And so many of us are so disconnected from our plant world and our natural world. We have to take it slow and get to know them.
And that's where I wanted to go, because, a good friend of mine, when I slowly got out of the just book intellectualizing, reading this stuff, into actually practicing, a good medium friend of mine told me that they'll be in touch with you 24 hours a day if you let them. You got to start forming boundaries, what have you. Otherwise, you may not be able to handle it. And so, there's been others that that David and I have talked to and I've spoken to outside of the podcast where, they may feel they're getting a call and they're having these retreats or going like 8, 9, 10 times in like 2 years. And you had a 10-year relationship where, it was slow and steady wins the race versus what may or may not have been ego-driven. Like I've gone once and I just want to, maybe I'm fulfilling something else as opposed to what the intention was to actually have this relationship with plant medicine.
But, this plant medicine also, particularly when in my understanding of ayahuasca, is that it's also a relationship. And so she forms a relationship differently with every human. What feels authentic and truthful and right in my body and being for my relationship with working with her may be completely different for somebody else. It may be less about ego and more that she called somebody to work with her that many times in a row so that she could really navigate through a deep trauma or a deep wound or something that needs to come up and out. Because again, she is such a powerful force that the medicine itself, you'll receive a different experience every time. And the 2 experiences I had were completely opposite of one another, and yet they were exactly what I needed in both of those times. And so I feel like because it's not necessarily a particularly pleasant experience for a lot of the journey, because there's a lot of purging and a lot of deep emotion and a lot of really intense navigation, that I do think somebody, like, there's a healthy trepidation to experiencing the medicine, and there's a healthy sense of anxiety that kind of kicks into the body when you're about to embark upon it. So I feel like when somebody feels called that many times, more power to them, because that is a healthy sense of knowing that there's a relationship being nurtured there that needs to be explored.
That actually goes in line with the podcast we had last week. We were speaking with a gentleman who David knows really well, and through 6 degrees of separation, we're all kind of related. But he had 5 near-death experiences, and I kind of looked at it the way you were saying it, in that, right, in this incarnation, you're maybe purging so much so you don't have to keep incarnating and going through it the slow route. It's kind of an accelerated rate. So,
and I think that especially that near-death experience, I feel like maybe that's really similar, and this kind of goes back to David's question too, to the channeling experience. I feel like our bodies sometimes get so overloaded with all of the overstimulation of our media and our technology, and the most common thing that I'm working with right now with my clients, because it always kind of goes in waves, is anxiety. The nervous system of humanity is just like hijacked right now. And I do think that can lead to experiences where people almost have to temporarily leave their body in order to like reset the button and come back.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think we really realize as humans how much all the technology and electronics, all that, how that affects us and our energy field and whatnot, because we're just experiencing as it happens, but we don't know we don't know anything else. We've always been alive when all this for the most part has been around.
Well, and that's the gift of plant teachers too. Is that they help to remind you of you are bigger than your body. For me, when I channel, there are a couple of different ways to channel, and some people just leave completely and are in trance and don't recall. And for me, I'm conscious, and yet I'm not really part of my body, but I'm there for it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I feel like, the difference between channeling or working with these abilities and working with a plant teacher is that the plant teacher will actually remind you that your body is not actually solid anymore. and that there's actually like a disorientation that's happening in your physical sensation of physical expression. But for me, channeling is kind of like stepping into the next room and listening to like a radio of a being coming through and talking about really cool things.
Now, was that a natural progression from the Peruvian lineage, or did they coincide with the channeling?
I think that they kind of coincided, although, again, channeling really surprised me too. I mean, they both kind of surprised me. I love to write, and I had an incredible writing teacher in college who always said to me, you know, a good story is surprising and yet inevitable. And I feel like that was kind of how channeling and shamanism found me. It was surprising to me, both of those experiences, and yet it also felt inevitable that would have been my path, even if I had never thought that would open for me. And channeling, you know, when I moved here to the Atlanta area for the first time back in 2012, that just kind of opened as a doorway. I sat at the computer one night, and I felt like I had studied other channels. I had watched, you know, Ramsa, and I had read Barbara Marciniak, and that was fresh on my mind because I really resonated with the Pleiades and the star people in general. And I sat down at my computer and was like, well, I want to try. We'll see what happens. And I closed my eyes, and my hands started typing. And it was the Pleiadians, and they're like, hello, we've been waiting to talk to you. It almost felt like this predestined kind of meeting again. And then from there, it just all opened. But it was surprising.
Wow. And so that was when you said in 2012?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
So channeling for me is still relatively new.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So how has that kind of grown over the past 6 years? Your understanding of from that first experience to present time as far as channeling? What have you learned?
God, so much. When I first began, I was writing it. I was typing it. It was like automatic writing. You know, I'd close my eyes and open them 4 pages later. Yeah. And then it kind of progressed into speaking it out loud, but when the energy would come into my body, and I started mostly by channeling the Pleiadian emissaries of light for the first, I would say, a year and a half at least, pretty solidly. And I felt like I was still, because of my own childhood trauma and wounding, I was still so nervous to leave my body, even though that felt most comfortable to me. You know, I think probably a lot of human beings share that, in that when we experience trauma in our life, our natural impulse and tendency is to want to actually leave the body so that we're not feeling the physical experience of the trauma.
Yeah.
And yet for me, the thought of leaving the body to bring in a different being was also, while it was exciting, it was scary, because even though it felt comfortable to leave my body, it didn't, it made me feel nervous that I wouldn't come back. So there was this level of having to develop a trust in a relationship with the Pleiadians, and they really helped to open the door for me because, you know, at first my eyes were closed, my body would actually rock because it felt like, and I've seen this with a number of other channels too, it feels like when you're connecting to that frequency and it's so high, you know, whatever being you're connecting to, that the physical body almost like 2 different waves, they have to kind of hit one another and find the equilibrium. And so I felt like my body would physically move and rock. And then the more I got acclimated to their energy and their frequency, I could actually kind of leave the body and open my eyes without feeling like I would come back in a minute. And then from there, I realized that, you know, I could channel other beings, not just the Pleiadians, and so now I channel plant spirits and crystals and angels and goddesses and ascended masters, and kind of sky's the limit. But when I first began, because it was all so new, it was almost like I set all these rules for myself. Like I couldn't eat, a couple hours before because I needed to stay like high frequency. And, I just set all of these unnecessary rules for myself to kind of create a healthy boundary. So I knew what the distinction was between me and them. Yeah. And now I realize that, I just need to kind of close my eyes and they'll pull me out. It's almost like being pulled through a straw. They'll pull me out of my body, kind of drop me in what I like to call the crystal pyramid, and that's where I kind of hang out for a while and get healing. And then they come in and they do their thing. It's really fascinating, but it has evolved for sure.
Yeah. So I think you said when you first were talking about this, but I'll ask you anyway. So when you are channeling, you are aware, like, as opposed to people that, like, when they come back, they have no recollection of what just happened, but you hear everything that's going on and you are aware of the session?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Pretty much every word. I mean, it's almost like I'm heightened to every word. And yet, when I get popped back into my body again, my recall is not really quite as clear. Like, it's almost like I'm hypersensitive to every second of it, mm-hmm. and then I come back to the body and kind of forget a bunch of it. It's very interesting.
Wow. All right.
Yeah, I remember before Jerry Hicks had passed away, and I think they use it even to this day, that they have some type of monitor and they can see the energy when before and after Abraham comes through.
Mm-hmm.
So, I've seen that with Esther, or even as far back as what's her name, when you talk about Seth and Jane Roberts, that their partner or spouse, whatever, usually records it because it's so hard to recall everything. And it's probably, I guess that's why I want to ask you about Barbara Melchizedek, because it seems like and this is just my opinion on this, but initially it was more of, I want to get the message out there. And then maybe as it matured or as time went on, it seemed like she was inserting some of her beliefs into the channel. And so there may be some level where, again, just my opinion, there may be some level of, if you're a pure channel, it has to be recorded. Otherwise, you're trying to, you're blocking the flow of that channel coming through by putting your own take on it.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily, because I don't listen to a whole lot of other channels, mostly because I want to stay as pure as possible. So I don't know if I have the same vantage point just because I don't have the same exposure, although I have read a few of her books. Mm-hmm. But I do think, if we're called to be a channel, it's our job to be as pure as possible. And for me, I kept expecting to leave my body completely and have no recollection. And I always record, always, because I don't remember most of it, although I'm there for all of it. But it's kind of the same when somebody's listening, too, I think. It's almost like these beings have so much information, it's almost too much to take in one sitting. Like, you can't possibly hear all of it almost. The body can't process all of it. It has to be unpacked over, like, a number of different listenings. And I find it to be the same, for me, for sure. I have a 3-year-old, so I don't always get to listen back as much as I'd like to. But I do think that, it is important and pivotal to stay super, super crystal clear. And I think for me, that was why when I first started channeling, I had my eyes closed. Because I was nervous that if I opened my eyes, me as Kady would feel too present in the body to be able to distinguish what was me and what wasn't me. But the more that I got comfortable with the frequency and the more that I worked with it, the more I realized that actually they really have control. And that was, I think, what I grappled with when I first started channeling was, the inner control freak in me was like terrified of losing control of my body, which anybody would be. But, of course, I only call in pure divine frequency, and I get super clear on my energetic boundaries and what I will and will not allow in my body, because it's my body, first and foremost. And the more I started to work with that protection, the more easeful it felt to let go of the control, so that I wasn't, even if I wanted to insert my agenda, I couldn't. Like, I have no control mechanism that's there until they pop me back in.
Mm-hmm. I know that in some of the I'm a big Abraham, and that was my first foray into this area.
Mm-hmm.
And so they always say that if even with plant or anything, where we, as you said it a couple of times, getting out of the body, and they're like, if you only knew how hard you wanted to be in that body, you should really stop fighting getting out of the body. Especially in our world, David and I in the past have talked about walk-ins, and if you keep expressing this interest that you don't want to be in your body, then someone else is like, if you don't want it.
Yeah, it's up for grabs. I mean, that's where I think the near-death experience comes in a lot of times. I think that's the walk-in, like transference.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're so right, though, because, and again, we're as a civilization, we're so not only culturally conditioned, but just genetically conditioned to be wary of trauma in our body, because that's what we've come from. I mean, every single human on this planet has come from trauma at this point, not only from their own experience, but also generationally. And I think it's so embedded in our bodies now that it is a natural defense mechanism to just want to vacate and want to leave the body. But you're right. I mean, especially a lot of divine beings, I agree with that. And what Abraham brings through, and I actually do really resonate very strongly to Abraham. I do feel like these beings tell us all the time, look, you're not here to have a perfect life. You're not here to only be in joy. You're here to experience emotion physically. You're here to experience the gut clench. You're here to experience the butterflies. You're here to experience the joy and the fear and the anger, and all of it is vital. But I think you're right. There's a natural tendency to want to leave, and that's I agree with you. I think that's why walk-ins, it's almost like contractual. It's like, hey, I'll take the body for the first 20 years, and then you'll hop in, and you get to just like keep going without having to come in as a child and as a baby and go through the whole gamut.
Mm-hmm. And I guess we can say that everyone is a little bit like that, right? On some level, right? And I'm bringing levity to it, of course, but right, people that I had relationships with in my 20s were different than the mid-20s or 30, It was like, wow, is this a really different person?
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, everyone is growing and evolving.
Mm-hmm. I guess that's what, it brings me to my next question about trauma, because when we talk about transitioning, there's a saying that people cry on both sides. Like, we cry when someone transitions, they're no longer living. Mm-hmm. The others kind of cry a little bit because you're about to go, maybe tears of joy, but you're going through this life, and it's actually hard through the birth process versus the death process. So you actually incarnate through trauma.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's, I mean, I have a really good friend, Sarah Brianne Grady, who I'm just going to throw into this podcast because she's also an incredible healer, and at some point you guys got to get her on the show. But she is constantly talking about the deepest trauma that we all carry, which is the mother wound. Our first trauma is separation from the mother. Every single human has it. There's immediate sense of abandonment, which is the very first trauma that every human experiences. And I think, that's compounded by actual birth trauma. Even the quote-unquote perfect birth is still traumatic to the child. And yet, when there's compounded trauma, where there's a complication or there needs to be immediate surgery, or there's a cord around the neck, or, I came onto the planet in birth trauma. I was breech, and I had a cord around my neck. I think that it takes us most of our life to kind of peel away the layers of that trauma. You know, for me, one of my biggest, which is why channeling was so scary at first, although exhilarating at the same time, was my biggest trauma was, am I safe? Because the very first experience I had coming onto the planet was one of not feeling safe and fundamentally feeling like scared, fearful of the physical reality. And I think a lot of human beings have that, and yet we don't even think about the fundamental trauma of safety. Am I safe in my body? First and foremost, it's the one thing that I'm constantly healing in myself.
After your experience in your incarnation, and it's just top of mind because we just had another gentleman on a previous podcast, and his wife, he's having his 8th child, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think the last, David, 4 or 5 children, they've all had the water births or natural births at home. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Did you go that route with your child also because of what you've gone through?
I did. I'm really grateful that I had a really beautiful pregnancy, and my daughter was born in ceremony. When I first went into labor, it was light enough that I could open sacred space, and she was born in the water, little fish. Wow. But I think the beauty is that, you know, because I see this a lot in the birthing community too, there's a lot of like unconscious shame that's thrown around attached to a birthing experience, because one person's comfort level, and, you know, for me, my experience of that feeling safe and nurturing might be another woman's like complete trauma and fear. And the thought of being at home giving birth could like create so much fear in the body that it would actually hinder the birthing. So I think that there is a lot of beauty to however a human being comes onto the planet, which I know that you also agree with. But I just feel like in this moment, I don't know if maybe somebody is listening that needs to hear that or will be listening that needs to hear that. But I always think it's really important to me to name that it's all beautiful. You know, we all have different experiences of reality for a reason. Mm-hmm. But I was really grateful to have that. Yeah.
No, and that, I guess that's why we covered it, because, like you said, when you don't know, I mean, the far reaches of the Internet where people hear these and come back and the feedback, you're like, wow, we were totally thinking something different, and everyone's interpretation is different. So I do want to back up for a quick second, because we were talking about channeling, and you were talking about your introduction around 2012, and, you know, it's 6 years later. And I have a relationship question for you. So with Daryl Anka, who channels Bashar, or Esther with Abraham, or I forget her name, who channeled Ramtha, they've all had, in essence, you know, even Jane and Seth, a relationship with not one entity, but one or multiple energies that we interpreted as one energy. Mm-hmm. And you're, in essence, kind of like at the beginning stages, do you, with crystals and ascendant masters and so on, is there a jockeying for, hey, we're going to ride the wave with Kady forever? Like, I'm trying to understand, will you ultimately just channel one energy that feels right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why I stuck with the Pleiadians for so long, because I feel like I am a star being in a lot of ways, and I think I have such a deep resonance with the star people that from my opinion, I thought that was just the way it happened. It was like one group of beings called you and that was it. But the more that I've channeled, I actually feel like instead of it staying kind of stable and having and building a relationship with one group, though I have that with a number of different beings, I actually feel like I don't think I'll ever channel just one being. Now that I know I can bring through this kaleidoscope of different vantage point and perspective, I feel like that's actually part of what makes me as a channel unique, and also part of the vital aspect of why I was called to do this work and be conscious. I almost feel like there's a really important piece there where it was like a contract of, okay, the Pleiadians are going to kind of like get you used to this process. They're going to drop you into your body and like really help you understand the process of channeling. And then this like bigger contract with a number of different beings is going to start to open, so that if somebody comes to me and they want to talk to Archangel Michael, who is like my main man, and I talk to him, I would say most personally. I mean, he's one of my personal guides. I'd say he's probably like 80% of humanity's guide. But, you know, I channel him a lot. I channel Mama Isis. I love, love, love the frequency of Isis, the goddess Isis. I channel Merlin quite a lot, and we have a really great relationship. I channel the Pleiades and star beings a lot. You know, I think something about my contract to channel was always about, though I didn't know it, that I was meant to bring through a number of different vantage points, and that was part of why they equipped me with the ability to stay in the body so that I could like change the channel. I mean, it feels almost like a switchboard. And it's like, okay, let's like plug into Channel Angel today and build and deepen that relationship. And it's like getting to know a number of friends in your life. It's like you don't want just one friend. You want to like have relationships with all of the different vantage points and all of the different people and cultural identities and perspectives. And there's something just so illuminating about that to me that I don't think I could ever settle for just one.
Sure. Now, you said, like, if you're watching a channel, let's just use Netflix, right? So you're watching one show, you might binge on that and for the day. And then the next day, you might binge on another show. Mm-hmm. And so for a session, is it, in this session, I'm specifically channeling the Pleiadians, and then another session, Archangel Michael, or do they kind of swirl in one reading?
It kind of depends. I mean, it's really interesting. You know, my sessions are always unique and always different, even if I'm working with the same person. And like some sessions are somebody coming to me and saying, I want to talk to X, Y, and Z. And so we'll bring them through, and that will be the session. Sometimes somebody will come to me and say, I don't even know why I'm here, which actually happens to me a lot. People find me, and they go, I don't really know why I'm here, but I know I'm supposed to be here. And then from there, we'll usually navigate, like, okay, do we feel like we're meant to be doing some healing work together today, or some channeling work, or maybe a combination of both? In some sessions, I have multiple beings. It's almost like you used the word jockeying earlier to describe the channeling experience, and I almost feel like that's how it feels sometimes. I'll sit in front of somebody and I can feel Archangel Michael there wanting to talk, and I can also feel Metatron, and I can feel Merlin, and I can feel Saint Germain, and it's like this, I can feel the whole like crew around them that like could talk to them, but some feel stronger than others. And so we'll either choose one or we'll kind of switch between them. But yeah, it's just kind of different for every experience and every session. And I think the gift, and I think there are more and more people who are starting to become conscious channels and are able to hold the frequency in their body while still being conscious of what's happening. Because I think that's part of the trance channel movement, as just a side note, is that before, when the frequency was lower on the planet, it was too much energy to hold in your body while simultaneously staying a part of your body. But I think now that we're kind of elevating in our consciousness and our dimensionality and our frequency, I do notice that there are a lot more channels who are conscious channels, like I am, who are able to hold and sustain the frequency while still being privy to it as it's happening. You know, we have so much on our plates. I know personally for me, I can't afford to channel for 2 hours and then go back and listen for another 2. If I can listen at the same time that it's happening, I'm, killing 2 birds with 1 stone on some level. And so I do feel like, yeah, there's something really interesting that happens when when you can be conscious of it at the same time, because then the session also heals me too. You know, I have an opportunity to gain some information that might also be speaking to where I am in that moment on my personal journey as Kady.
Mm-hmm. Good point. And you did mention earlier that in October there's plans for sacred ceremonies in Peru. Mm-hmm. And David told me that you have plans to go to Europe in the fall. And I think you have an upcoming event or something, if you want to talk about that as well.
Yeah, well, I last August, around that kind of really big eclipse portal, which I'm sure you remember, I started waking up with these spontaneous downloads, which is usually how kind of my etheric team, so to speak, likes to give me information. And they started to download this new healing modality, which is something I'm still exploring and playing with, which right now I'm calling Mythic Healing, which is a combination of working with global mythological practices, global stories, and kind of the arc of the hero's journey, so to speak, or the heroine's journey through life, and applying that towards the healing process so that we can navigate our life without getting mired in the trauma. You know, I think that's the gift of storytelling, and why I love storytelling so much is that we all have that one show or that one movie or, a story or a book that speaks to us on a deep level and comforts us and reminds us of our own humanity and reminds us of the journey, that it's not always clean and smooth and that there is going to be the obstacle, but that's when you break through. And, I think in being able to see a bigger perspective, then we can apply that to the personal healing and actually evolve without feeling like the trauma is overwhelming the system. And so when I started to get these downloads, the next piece of information that I heard was go to school. And I have a bachelor's degree in theater studies and storytelling, but I knew immediately that I needed to go back to school and get a degree to deepen my understanding of mythology and to deepen my connection. And though I've studied this for most of my life, it's been one of my passions since childhood. And I have studied a lot of mythology from a number of different sources. I did feel like I wanted to have an actual foundation, a deeper academic foundation that would help me to stabilize some of what was already kind of milling around in my consciousness. And so I applied to a program in Canterbury, England, and got accepted. So I originally was planning to go this particular fall. I've since deferred to 2019 only in that, this is one of my common experiences, is that I want to push the timeline. I think probably a lot of human beings will resonate with that. I can hear a clear path, and I know it's the right direction, but I want to force the timeline to make it happen faster because it's exciting. And I came to realize that I was living in Asheville at the time. I moved back down here to Georgia December 2017, and I felt like I was going a million miles an hour, and it was actually creating a lot of anxiety for me, the thought of kind of condensing the timeline into that 2018 academic year. So as soon as I made the decision to just enroll the following year, my whole body relaxed and opened. But I am actually going, because I have a flight already booked, I am actually going also to the UK this summer on a pilgrimage. It's kind of like Pilgrimage Part 1 and Pilgrimage Part 2.
Wow. And I know that there's a greater openness over there. So, you're going to have a really good time. I guess selfishly, I know our good friend Yvonne, who's a medium. I don't know if you know her or not, but, she lives here, but her origins is in Ireland. And so initially she had planned to go, for break while the kids were out of school for like 4 or 5 weeks, and then she wound up staying for like 10 months. People are like, when you come? It is like this whole other life because there's so much acceptance over there. So it may be things you're not even imagining yet. And the Pleiadians are like, well, just wait until she lands to give her additional.
I know. I think my team, so to speak, I see this like glint in their eyes and this like, that the hands rubbing together mischievously because I think they're like, just you wait, like you have no idea, like you think you're going for something and you're going to get like all these crazy downloads and all these new directions, and especially it particularly calls to me also that land, because it's my ancestry is pretty much most of the UK. I mean, I have Irish ancestry and lineage on both sides, Welsh and Scottish, and a little bit of English. So I'm pretty much just the UK in a body. And so there's also just this deep, deep heart connect there for me, this sense of that's my land. This is land I know I've nurtured and loved and have been a caretaker for in so many lifetimes and so many bodies that it's almost like a homecoming.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely really exciting.
What you said, what resonates with me as far as my takeaway from this is your exercising of patience, because if there is no time, right, and you're channeling, you could do a lot of future tense, and I know I get caught up in it, and they're just like, you just sit and wait. Like, there's some steps before you get there. That will make sense.
It's so important, and I'm begrudgingly patient. I will say, I'm very human in that my mom once told me my first phrase coming onto this planet was, hurry, I need it. I think I just have always come from a place of like, hurry. And I do think it's a really important lesson for me in allowing the natural divine flow. And I know that we all get glimpses of that, and we all are certainly in alignment with that. And you're right. I mean, there definitely is no such thing as time anyway. But I do think it's a human tendency to want to push something to happen faster when it just feels so joyful. And yet, I think that's the gift of our physical bodies, is that what I'm learning the more that I try to ground and anchor into my body is that our bodies are dowsing rods. If we're feeling resistance and we're feeling tension, we have to trust that that's our body's way of saying, hey, not yet. And if we feel ease and we feel joy and it's smooth and, just easeful, I think that that's our body's way of saying, yeah, this is a go. And if we all just were able to get more in tune with our bodies enough to listen to those subtle cues, we could just douse our way through life in alignment with the divine plan so easily.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's, the whole Eckhart Tolle and being in the present moment, that's our most powerful moment. So I guess we're not appreciating that moment when we're like, hurry.
Yeah, now, I want it now.
Well, so we are at the top of the hour, but I'm sorry, David. You know her already, so I just had a billion questions. I know I kind of ran through. But are there any other questions that you had, David?
I think we covered them all. I mean, we could sit here and go on and on. One quick question I'll ask. Kady, have you ever found yourself in a situation where, I don't know, maybe you had some uncertainty about what you're getting ready to do, and you're like, well, hey, I can just channel a being or someone that has this kind of information and that can, help me out in this particular situation. You ever done anything like that before?
I do a little bit. It's interesting, and I'm sure a lot of people would probably say the same thing, that it's harder to channel for yourself than it is for other people. It's like I think I could, but like it just doesn't feel as like it's easier for me to like tell somebody, hey, could you ask this question on my behalf, than it is for me to go, hey, Archangel Michael, will you just come in for a second and, like, make me feel better?
Yeah.
Because it just doesn't really have the same resonance for some reason. And it's the same with self-healing, I think. You know, everyone's capable of self-healing, and yet when we have an opportunity to go to somebody else to experience healing, the part of us that's invested in that answer that I would be asking, or that healing, the part of the ego that wants to know, doesn't have the need to be on anymore. So it can be personally invested in the healing journey because of the placeholder of that other person. Yeah. And I think that's the role of the healer, and I'm sure many people have said to you, I mean, nobody's healing you. I'm not healing people. I'm just holding space for you to heal yourself. But sometimes we need the placeholder to have an external perspective bounce back to us so that the ego doesn't have to get involved in the healing process.
Okay.
There's a lot of talk in last couple of weeks with Steven Spielberg. You know, he always makes really good movies and thought-provoking movies. So they're talking about this Ready Player One, which kind of resonates with what you and David were just talking about, because we want to incarnate for the interchange with our fellow humans. And if we entered everything ourselves, we'd stay home. Like, there wouldn't be any reason to go outside.
Yeah, I mean, there'd be no reason for us to interact with anyone, right? We could just, like, have our etheric friends forever, just, you know, like, exist off of light and air. You know, I think there's something so beautiful about being human and about being messy. And I know for me, I'm always trying to embrace messiness of human consciousness, because, I mean, we're not here to be perfect. We're not here to be the Buddha or Jesus or all of the ascended teachers that we look to. We're already those things. We're here to just experience the mess and the energy of chaos and the frustration and sometimes the fear and the pain, and that's what we're learning by having these bodies. So we can't. I'm writing this article right now on spiritual perfectionism because I'm also victim to it. You know, I thought, if I were to walk this path, I need to do it from a place of so much purity that I actually was losing my humanity. And there's a way to still be in alignment with our authenticity and with our deep integrity to this path and to the wisdom of this path, and yet also be human and enjoy the body and enjoy the human experience.
Yes,
that's actually a good place to, I don't know how we can top that. That's a good way to end it. Kady, let us know, or let the readers and listeners know about your social medias and websites so they can get more information from you.
Yeah, my website is kadymorgan.com, Kady Morgan, and I do have a Facebook page. It should just be under Kady Morgan. I don't have Instagram or any of those fancy things, although I've been told I need to get them. But you know, I like to just connect the people in perfect and serendipitous timing. So usually, I really enjoy when people just kind of find me. But yeah, I'm just so grateful. What an awesome way to spend, you know, an hour 15 minutes of my life talking to you.
Yeah.
We are very humbled and very happy that we were able to have you on here as well.
Yeah.
Oh, so grateful. Thank you.
Yeah. So you have just been in tune to another episode of Intrinsic Motivation from a homie's perspective. This is Hamza.
And I am David.
And it was a pleasure speaking with a fellow gum chewer and an embracer of messiness. We need to have you back, Kady.
Thank you. I would so love it.
Yes, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Bye.
Listen to Intrinsic Motivation from a homie's perspective on RadioPublic. It's a free, easy-to-use app that helps listeners like you find and support shows like ours. When you listen to our show on RadioPublic, we receive direct financial support every time you hear an episode. Experience our show in RadioPublic today by listening to the show link in our episode notes, and thank you for listening. Thanks again for checking out another episode of Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective podcast. Please check us out on our website at intrinsicmotivation.life, where you can click on the Speak Pipe button and leave any suggestions for future podcasts that you'd like us to cover. Also, check us out on our social media sites. We have a YouTube channel, Facebook page, iTunes podcast, in addition to Stitcher and Google Play, all under Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective. Check you out next time. Have a great day.